Israel's full-scale invasion to seize Gaza City has begun. Thousands of Israelis themselves tried to stop it, but far-right leaders have led the call, summoning 60,000 reservists for their highly controversial mission. Most believe it's the first step in Israel's plan to occupy all of Gaza and ethnically cleanse all Palestinians. But can it be done? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is Gaza. Israel's assault on Gaza has hit yet another low, one that many had warned about. Arguably few could believe was possible. With its invasion of Gaza City, Israel is launching a dangerously illegal plan to occupy the Gaza Strip and forcibly displace its residents, ignoring all pleas both from international authorities and its own people to immediately engage in a ceasefire. Israel has instead forged ahead with its most radical and lethal plan. Here's a look. Gaza City, the largest population center remaining in the enclave and still home to around 1 million Palestinians. Now it's the focus of Israeli military action. Explosions were seen along Gaza's skyline on Wednesday night and Thursday morning, with forces already on Gaza City's outskirts as Israel shifts into even higher gear, calling reservists into action ahead of a planned full occupation of the remaining sections of the Gaza Strip. As part of preparations for the next phase, the Chief of Staff has instructed us to issue 60,000 reserve orders for the beginning of September. In addition to these orders, we will extend another 20,000 orders to reservists and battalions already serving today. The military call up ahead of the planned offensive to take Gaza City will likely see call-up notices sent in coming days. Reservists will begin reporting for duty in September. Already the military draft is tearing at the seams as clashes erupted between Israeli security forces and ultra-Orthodox protesters. I want to declare, first of all, openly and publicly, we are not interested in this state. We will not enlist under any circumstances, in any way, in any form. There is nothing to discuss. As long as this so-called Jewish state exists, we will not enlist under any circumstances, in any way, in any form. Back in Gaza City, numbers of Palestinians have been fleeing to areas that are already under the control of Israel's military. Others defiant in their resistance. We are living in a tent that I swear to God is patched together, tied with a rope at some place. And at night the tent falls on you. You have to get up to do something in the tent. You bump your head on iron poles of the tent. Still 90% of the tents in the area are like this. We are in an area where these tents have been moved twice, 3, 4, and 5 times. Renewed calls for a ceasefire continue, but appear to be falling on deaf ears. Hamas released a statement accusing Netanyahu of obstructing a ceasefire deal in order to continue a brutal war against innocent people in Gaza City. I must reiterate that it is vital to reach immediately a ceasefire in Gaza and the unconditional release of all hostages, and to avoid the massive deaths and destruction that a military operation against Gaza City would inevitably cause. And away from Gaza, another front of a different kind. Israel gave final approval for a new illegal Israeli settlement to be built in the E1 sector of the occupied West Bank. This new site would place the construction of several thousand new Israeli apartments and residences in between Ramlah and Bethlehem, effectively splitting and blocking the geographical link between the two Palestinian cities. Israel stands condemned of blocking any path to peace or a two-state solution, killing off the prospect of a Palestinian state. With a death toll exceeding 62,000 Palestinians since October 7, they show no signs yet of heading down any peaceful path. Joining me now to discuss Israel's latest escalation in its war on Gaza are, from Ramlah, founder and leader of the Palestinian National Initiative, Mustafa Barghouti; from Tel Aviv, political analyst and contributor to Correct, Akiba Elder; from London, lecturer in humanitarian policy and practice at University College London, James Smith. Thanks all so much for being with me. Akiva, I need to begin with you to try to understand what's happening in Israel. We know there are some deep political divisions already in the country. Has this invasion of Gaza City, as well as the underlying plan to occupy the Gaza Strip, plus the call up of an additional 60,000 reservists, started to break some of the support for and unity around this war? To those 60,000, we need to add another 20,000 that are already in the Gaza Strip and are reservists, and the period of recruitment has been extended. These are people who are leaving their families. Some of them will have to start the academic year very soon, at the beginning of September. They don't see the end. They don't see why they have to risk their lives. They know that what they have been told for a very long time is that the number one objective of this is to get the hostages back. They know that it was reported today that, according to Ayal Zamir, the chief of staff, at least 100 of them will not get back alive. And the prospects of releasing the 20 hostages, I believe the numbers are declining as we are talking. This is non-existent. The problem is right now that even Netanyahu, I believe, doesn't have a clue how to get out of there. You know, we have this idiom in Hebrew that he climbed a very high tree and there is no one there to offer him a ladder. Just reminding you what President Trump said yesterday, Netanyahu is a hero. Of course, Trump is also a hero. They are competing who is a greater hero. And the Israeli public is in a kind of fatigue, right? People are willing to go to the streets in 35, 37 degrees and call for the release of the hostages, but they are not calling to end the war, and they are not calling to bring down Netanyahu because they lost hope. Yeah, that change is possible. Think your expression in Hebrew has an English equivalent in one word, and we call that a quagmire. I'd like to speak more about that in just a second. Let me first ask James, how would this action that Israel is taking, the end game that too many Israeli far-right ministers and legislators have in mind, be at all sustainable from a humanitarian perspective? Starvation has already been acknowledged, and now countless more people will be dispersed and sent into even more difficult to access areas. Absolutely. The first thing to say is that there's nothing sustainable from a humanitarian or indeed any other perspective with respect to Netanyahu's ambitions now to intensify attacks on Gaza City and imminently bring Israeli military ground forces into the city. Approximately 1 million Palestinians are still estimated to be residing above the Netarim corridor. We have to appreciate also and emphasize that almost 90% of the entirety of the Gaza Strip is already under either direct Israeli military occupation or subject to imposed Israeli forced displacement orders. All that will come from this is more death, more destruction, and a deepening of Israel's strategy of genocidal violence. What's different here about Israel's actions as compared to war crimes and crimes against humanity and the conduct of conflict in many other contexts is that those who are perpetrating the genocide have been explicitly clear about their ambitions. There is no ambition here to release the hostages. The intent is to forcibly displace Palestinians towards the south, to coral them into what they're referring to in the most profound of misnomers as a humanitarian camp. And then they will, of course, want to make living conditions for displaced Palestinians in those camps horrific, such that hundreds of thousands either choose to or are forced to displace to third countries. Okay, are they forced to, Mustafa? Let me put this to you, because all of this, plus more and more international support for the Palestinian cause, is strengthening Palestinians' resolve to have to resist all of this. But how do Palestinians even continue to fight for what is right, for what their cause, which is just, what we face here as Palestinians is nothing but existential threat, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. Netanyahu knows exactly what he is doing. He's a fascist leading a fascist government with fascist ministers and with a fascist plan to expand the war crimes in Gaza to a level that is unprecedented in human history. What we are talking about here is not only continuation of genocide, but the actual implementation of the ethnic cleansing of all the Palestinians from Gaza, trying to put them, the 2.2 million people, in the largest concentration camp in human history. Imagine 2.2 million people in an area that does not exceed 10 square kilometers with no infrastructure, no clean water, no food, with diseases spreading among them and conflicts, deprived of everything. This is the reality of what Netanyahu is trying to create. He doesn't care about the Israeli captives. And by the way, everybody talks about the 20 Israeli captives and nobody mentions the 12,000 Palestinian prisoners, some of whom are 400 children who are hostages in Israeli jails, as well as 3,650 who are there without even charges. Yeah. No. That's about the 20 Israeli captives, and nobody mentions the 12,000 Palestinian prisoners. I'm just wondering, Mustafa, if you've seen, I don't know, the word parallels seems strange to use, but I know you've often compared Israel to the apartheid state and the apartheid leadership, and we saw in that case, in particular, the constant resistance from people who had so few means to continue resisting. This is the position that Palestinians have now been left in. Where will we see, perhaps, Palestinian unity to come together and continue to resist, even in the most horrific conditions possible? Do you think they can? Absolutely. Some people won't accept unity. It's their problem. But the vast majority of the Palestinian people have only one way, which is to unite and resist and survive. There is no alternative to that. Many people had the illusions that the Israeli governments would go into the illusion of compromise, the so-called two-state solution, and they signed the Oslo Agreement with them. What do we see now? All the illusions are gone, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. What we face here is something that humanity did not face since the Nazi time in the Second World War. And Netanyahu speaks not only about annexing all of the West Bank and Gaza Strip and ethnically cleansing Palestinian people, but also about Greater Israel. He wants to, in the future, annex Jordan, all of Lebanon, half of Syria, half of Iraq, half of Egypt, half of Saudi Arabia, and all of Kuwait. This is the level of fascism that you are facing now and we are seeing in Israel. Okay? And of course, all of that would not have happened if it wasn't for the total support of Trump's administration and the United States throughout the years effectively. So let me ask Akiva, back to what we were saying before, is Israel now pulling itself into a quagmire even more abysmal than what perhaps the U.S. got into in Iraq? One that it won't be able to crawl its way back from. Actually, the IDF spokesman said yesterday that this war is not against the Hamas military force. It's a guerrilla organization. And just to remind you and the viewers how many people lost their lives in the war against ISIS, which was a guerrilla organization, at least 400,000 civilians, innocent people. Now, Netanyahu, as Mustafa said, has a vision, and his vision is Greater Israel. Don't believe he's too smart really to believe that the international community, including Egypt and Jordan, and the Arab countries who are members of the Abraham Accords, will sit back and watch while Netanyahu is occupying Jordan or the Sinai Peninsula. he is in a kind of a catch-22 because on one hand, he has to satisfy his partners from the radical right, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, and even people in Likud. Probably he has an appetite to annex some extra territories. But the Israeli public, who is paying the price? Those reservists and the Israeli soldiers that will not get back home. They don't have this appetite. They don't visit the West Bank. Some of them even are very careful when they visit East Jerusalem, alone occupy Gaza in order to allow Smotrich and those zealots to erect more settlements there, and to put Israeli people in a position that they cannot travel with their Israeli passport and feel comfortable about it. There are Israelis who have been thrown out of camps in Europe or in Australia. They are not welcome anywhere in Europe now. And Netanyahu, with all due respect, he's not going to last forever. He's not healthy. He has his own problems with corruption that he will have to go back to court for at the end of October. And hopefully there will be another government that will be willing to go back to the two-state solution and negotiate with real partners. Hamas is not a partner. Hamas is not willing to accept the two-state solution. Hamas is not even willing to recognize the Jewish people's right to self-determination. Okay, I have to ask something, though, to James, going back to what you were saying about the war crimes effectively being committed. As a consequence for war crimes, the ICC has at least tried to issue arrest warrants for Netanyahu and the Minister of Defense. Yet, as we said, here comes the U.S. now to sanction IC judges. So not only is there no accountability, there's punishment for attempting to hold people accountable for war crimes. So are we looking at the scenario whereby the Netanyahu legacy will damage not just Israel for generations to come, but the entire system of international justice beyond repair? Absolutely. I mean, always known that there are elements of international justice and functional multilateralism that are a fallacy. But certainly what we're seeing now, with respect to the total impunity with which Israel is able to conduct itself in Gaza and throughout occupied Palestine and the wider region, is revealing of the non-existence really of a functional multinational system. Indeed, the notions of justice, of accountability, are very clearly terms and language that Israel doesn't want to hear, to the point that, as you say, we're seeing efforts to stifle judges at the level of the ICC, to discredit rulings from the ICJ, organizations working in Gaza and throughout Palestine, be they Palestinian or international organizations, have had their staff banned. They've had their registration revoked. Organizations that are more outspoken are much more likely to be silenced. This is exactly the culture of impunity that allows Israel to get away with its crimes. And, Mustafa, that in itself will have a chilling effect in many ways. So if we look at the humanitarian disaster that's now being created, Mustafa, do you get the feeling that the international media and potentially the European allies of Israel might start to pull back on its support? Not the U.S. yet, but do you think there's a feeling of regret for not having taken a position against what Israel was doing much earlier on, and now that regret, if it's forthcoming, is far too late? I'm afraid that what you said is the right description, and in reality, the problem continues. Israel is already a pariah entity, and I don't believe there can be a new Israeli government that will fix the issue and go back to a two-state solution. I think that's over. The reality is that the vast majority of members of the Israeli parliament voted against a Palestinian state, not only those in the government, but many of those in the opposition. Israel itself, not only the Israeli government, but Israeli society, unfortunately, has moved very far in the direction of extremism and Jewish supremacy and fascism, I would say. And the world community will be asked the question why punishment is not done, why Israel is not subjected to sanctions as Russia was, why the double standards. All these Western governments that condemn know very well that their condemnation means nothing to Netanyahu as long as he's having the backing of Trump and the United States of America. So what is needed now immediately, without waiting, just to make some correction of this terrible delayed reaction, is to impose sanctions on Israel and tell Israel, if you continue this operation, you will be sanctioned. This is the only way to affect the Israeli government, and maybe the only hope to stop what would become the largest war crime in modern history in general. Yeah, let me final question for Akiva, because if the pressure doesn't come from outside, is it possible that it could come from inside? Because you had repeated earlier that too many Israelis have actually tuned out the news in Gaza. They refuse to even look at the images. Now more and more of their loved ones will actually be forced to witness and take part in these atrocities in person. So could that finally potentially change a majority of Israeli minds on their support for this military action and for the solution of occupying all of Palestinian territory, ending any scope for a two-state solution, and trying to finish the Palestinian population altogether? Well, believe that once the cries of a status quo and the creeping annexation of the West Bank and looking like Iran, and Iran is still under very heavy sanctions, and we don't see that the Iranian people are struggling to bring down the Ayatollahs. This government, they are suffering economically, they are isolated internationally, and still they don't wake up because maybe they lost hope And this is also the case in Israel. People are losing hope. Some people believe, like my friend Mustafa said, that this is the end of a two-state solution. The fascist politicians took over, and that Netanyahu did such damage to Israel that it's irreversible. But on the other hand, if you look at the polls, Netanyahu's coalition is not even close to a 60 majority. They're closer to 50 than to 60, and probably there will be early elections. The Israeli people are not willing to pay the billions of dollars just to keep the Palestinians in Gaza under occupation, as well as the West Bank. And to be bad, with all due respect to President Trump, whom I don't have great respect for, there are other members of the UN who are starting to use sanctions against Israel, and we feel it, and it hurts many Israelis. So we have to reach the bottom in order to wake.